their thoughts, their opinions. I will clearly be biased toward the direction of police-free schools. That doesn't mean that I don't value other people's opinions. I think we all should lean into this subject, lean into each other's views. So also encourage people to, as we give comments about what we've gone through or what our views are, to speak about yourself personally. And feel free to both, come off mute to ask a question, to throw questions into the chat. Let me see here. I can't actually see the chat now that I've shared my screen, but
I'll let you know. I got you.
Perfect. Yeah, so let's get into it. And also, I just want to say happy to be back in North Carolina. Started off as an 8th grade social studies teacher in South Carolina. Worked on school to prison pipeline issues, both in grad school and when I came back here, worked for the North Carolina Justice Center in Raleigh. Then off to law school. Career continued to really focus on school to prison pipeline issues and lifting up youth voice. Worked for the Advancement Project as their deputy director for their school to prison pipeline work, and was able to lift up the work and support the work for police-free schools campaigns throughout the United States. And really happy to bring that struggle back home here and to be able to fight for folks that I'm actually more accountable to, as opposed to the national work, actually living in a place that I'm also fighting for. So just excited to be here and to share with you all today. Yeah, Southern Coalition for Social Justice, we put forward both a community lawyer model and a movement lawyer model, which is more so what we do on our side, where we provide legal and policy analysis and support, representation. We provide communication support, and then we also provide strategy development for specific campaigns. And our campaigns are specifically those who are led by youth and adults of color who are working to end the school to prison pipeline, and also help those who are impacted by the justice system, including our folks returning home on a regular basis, and also supporting their families. So yeah. I want to start off with a scenario, and I think, how many people do we have? Many.
We have, minus us, well, 11 altogether, but minus you and I, 9. Oh yeah, 9.
9. Okay, great. So I won't do the breakout room thing, but we'll encourage everyone to chime in on this particular section. So going into the discussion about school policing, we really want to frame this in a way that gets beyond this kind of, well, what about this? What about that? This kind of the worst case scenario piece. So how do we get beyond it? We're actually going to confront it in the beginning and actually talk about what are some of the worst case scenarios, or what are some of the regular scenarios that are worst case for many people that are experienced on an everyday basis. So just a little hypothetical situation. You have a 14-year-old Black student who maybe has a history of verbal confrontations but has never been in a physical fight. You have a 14-year-old white student, both of these are young women, who has a history of actual teasing, taunting, and has been disciplined for that type of behavior before. As students transition, leaving lunch, going into 4th period, these two students in particular start to argue with one another in the hallway. This is a situation we've all seen before, right? So as these students start to get into it in the hallway, all of a sudden there's a circle around them, things start to elevate a little bit, right? So that's the scenario, that's where we're at now. This kind of point where it could tip one way or the other. Now, let's imagine that the school professional who approaches this situation is a school counselor, right? Trained, right? Not a school counselor who just does discipline, not a school counselor who just does career development and has, thousands of students to cover. But let's just assume the school is actually adequately resourced with school counselors that have regular relationships with students. So just want to throw it out there. Imagine the school counselor is the first to confront the situation. What is the best case scenario? And yeah, I used to teach, like I said, so I can call on volunteers if necessary.
Well, I'll try to chime in. I think the school counselor, the scenario for what the school counselor should do once they address the situation is to separate the girls, of course, and then separate them and ask them individually what happened and try to get to the bottom of it.
Okay. So actually address the underlying issue of what happened, right? Okay, great. So what is the worst thing that could happen?
The worst thing that could happen, maybe the counselor tries to physically restrain them themselves. I've seen that happen before. Or the counselor calls in unneeded school resource officers or whatever to the situation.
Okay. And I'm gonna back up a little bit. So best case scenario, the students respond positively and the counselor is able to get to the root of the situation. Why exactly would a counselor be well suited to do that?
The counselor would probably know, the students, like you said before, one of them had a certain record and the other one had another. And so if the counselor knows this, then they'll understand what the situation is.
Thank you. So there's a relationship there, there's training, de-escalation training. There's these things that we really would desire in a school counselor and in anyone who's going to confront the situation with these young adults present. So then to your other answer, worst case scenario, it actually becomes physical, right? Let's just throw it out all the way out there. Worst case scenario, he or she gets punched in the face, gets a black eye, and calls, we'll leave the police part out. Worst case scenario, there's a black eye for a guidance counselor. All right, let's sit with that. Pretend I wrote it on the board. Same situation. We're right back at the beginning of this hypothetical. They're getting into it, a crowd has emerged, and a school police officer is the first person to address the situation. Best case scenario.
Repeat that question again, if you don't mind.
Sure. So the two young women are arguing. There's a circle around them of other students, and now the school police officer is the first person to approach and try to rectify the situation. Mm-hmm. What is the best case scenario?
Separate, de-escalate, and engage the counselor.
Bam, right. No criminalization. They and I would, so they separate. And what might be, what characteristics of that officer might be necessary for them to actually have this positive outcome?
It would help if the school police officer had a relationship with the students.
Absolutely.
So instead of just being a situation where they're jumping in to be an enforcer of the law, but actually taking time to build community and know these students, they can understand what's going on.
Right. And no, I'm glad you said enforcer of the law, because that's actually what their job is. Mm-hmm. So if they actually didn't do a part of their job and focused on this other piece of de-escalation and were trained to do so and had a relationship with the students, all of these ifs on that. All right. Same situation, worst case scenario, if a police officer approaches to rectify the situation.
I think the first thing you want to do is de-escalate, 1. 2, you want to call for backup. 2, we're asking these police officers to be and these teachers to be babysitters, first and foremost, number 1, in this day and time. But I think an officer's job is, again, someone said it earlier, is to have the relationships, because you never know, one of those kids will save your life. You can't stop 45, 50 people in a circle. So let's be real about that. He can't control 50 people. I would call backup, whether it's the principal, whoever's close by, to remove both students. When they come, that the officer is able to move that one, and the other teacher, he or she's able to move the other one as well.
All right, so I'm worst case scenario though. Worst case.
Did I get hit?
Yeah, so worst case scenario, students fight
I'm an
anyway.
officer and I got hit.
Right.
I'm gonna restrain the child.
Physical restraint.
I'm gonna do what the law has told me to do as an officer. I'm gonna take the child and remove it. I'm not gonna restrain him or her and remove them out the way. If I get struck first, yes.
Physical.
That's an assault.
So
That's
physical restraint. Right, that's one potential outcome. That's still not the worst though.
The worst to me would be a police officer deciding to like assault kids.
Right. Sure.
Like come into this situation
Right.
and whatever they got going on in their day, and they feel empowered to, yes, they're officers of the law, but they decide that this is a situation where they need to treat these children that are 14 like they're 30-year-old full-grown adult men.
Right. So
yeah, I think I want to add on to that too, is the fact that hopefully in this, I know it's worst case scenario, but these are also 2 young girls. So the strength of a man is 3 times the size of a 14-year-old girl. So being more mindful that whatever pressure you're putting on them, I don't think physical restraint should be involved at all. Whatever strength you are using towards them, you're potentially harming a child, again, a minor. But I think in that, that's my point. That's all.
Right.
Thank you.
I want to add, yeah, I think the worst case scenario would be like maybe permanent physical injuries, being sustained by either of the students or the police officer.
And I'm gonna challenge y'all even further. Thank you for all those comments. Worst case scenario, when there's a gun and an officer involved in this situation, even with all these students around, I would offer is death. Is death. That's actually the word, like, because we're not like a bad outcome. Worst case scenario is death, either by accidental discharge of the gun, like during the restraint, or actually pulling and shooting. We've seen both of these instances, pulling and shooting outside of a school during a fight, and the accidental discharge inside a school on multiple occasions, right? The one outside led to death, the other one did not lead to an injury, but still very scary. It could happen. The reason we ask this is because, or we paint this hypothetical, is because often people always point to the worst case scenario when we talk about police officers being in schools. A school shooter, someone bring a gun to school, but we don't. And also, let's think about the worst case scenario for the guidance counselor is a black eye and some hurt feelings, right? So we are okay. And then the other piece is this bad scenarios, beautifully said by many of you. The bad scenario of criminalization, being physically assaulted, and being physically hurt in school. We regularly see the bad scenario on a daily basis, primarily against students of color. And we justify the possibility of even that worst scenario we said with this, with the need, quote unquote, to not have the counselor do their job and who has that relationship. So basically the notion of worst case scenario, the use of fear to justify placing someone in a position that could actually create death and harm and regularly creates criminalization. That justification is used to outweigh the funding, the support, the staffing of schools to prevent these situations from in the first place, and allow situations where a counselor can step in and does have a positive relationship, right? So I want us to get out. So I'm going to confront all the worst case, best case, all those scenarios in the beginning, because you're going to hear me say many of the bad scenarios, which are the actual regular scenario for students of color in schools. And that leads us also, we want to talk about the history of school policing. I encourage people to check out We Came to Learn, a call for police-free schools, and it's going to really outline the history and a lot of stuff we talk about today. So several myths go with school policing. One, that it's needed to create a safe environment, even for 2 young women who are about to get in a fight in school, that they're needed, we need them to be there for that situation, and that we can't invest in other alternatives. and that school policing is tied to school shootings, that we need them there to prevent school shootings. Both of those things I offer as false. We know that school policing is tied to the actual suppression of student movements as they participated in the civil rights movement in the early 1950s and 60s. We know that it is tied to a belief that Black people in particular need to be controlled and intimidated by law enforcement in the area so that they act better. You have more police in schools of students, serving students of color than you have in white schools, and even the actions, the behavior of those police are different. Bottom line, Black and brown students are policed differently. And then third, yeah, like as I mentioned, that they're needed to prevent mass shootings. But in all actuality, they actually help create very toxic environments for students of color. And school police officers have never actually stopped a mass shooting at a school. And many of the mass shootings we see actually already had officers there. There are instances of people stopping mass shootings. One in particular is a really powerful video of a young man who came to school with a shotgun. And it's the coach, the football coach, who hugs the student and takes the gun, right? Because he had a relationship, right? And he saw something was off, as opposed to escalating the situation and leading to something very dire. So just want to go into the fact that we want to talk about debunking these myths. We want to talk about letting go of this best and worst case scenario idea, because there are everyday scenarios. Forget best and worst. There are just simply everyday scenarios that end up being harmful for many students of color. And so, as I mentioned, just digging into the history of school policing and seeking to debunk that myth. School policing is tied to, so very specific examples. You have the Chicano walkouts in LA. You have student protests in Philadelphia and Baltimore in the 60s. And as it's no coincidence that shortly after these areas created their own school police departments. You also have youth being the leaders of the civil rights movement and of anti-war movements. And Nixon's war on drugs, his aide even admitted that the war on drugs was an attempt to disenfranchise and incarcerate Black voters and leftist anti-war protesters. The war on drugs itself adds to school policing by not only bringing in these gang task force, bringing in drug sweeps into schools, but also doing it in their communities, so that if you're in your community, you're heavily policed, then you go to school and you're heavily policed. It also means that the war on drugs in particular, that if your parents are swept away through this war on drugs, now you're left out there to dry and more likely to be targeted yourself. So we want to really connect school policing in particular, to the overall carceral state, to the overall prison industrial complex. I'm going to use some of these terms that we can flesh out later if necessary, but it is tied to this massive expansion of prisons and jails in the United States, and in particular with youth. A couple other pieces I want to talk about. So you have things like the Guns Free Schools Act that actually created and codified zero tolerance policies, making it so that the school didn't even have discretion as to how they handle certain things. They had to criminalize students, which if you have to criminalize them, why not have a police officer there in the first place, right? And if I would also offer that if this wave of criminalization was happening to white affluent students, we would have stopped a long time ago. But those, as we see throughout the data that we'll see later, those aren't people who are being affected. So then you have the rise of what is considered to be the school to prison pipeline movement, a lot of organizing, and then also a lot of pushback. And you do get Columbine. So school shootings did lead to greater investment in school policing. So an expansion of school policing, but they weren't the actual beginning of school policing. And also when we think about school shootings and them leading to the increase in student policing and student surveillance, just want to point out that when parents, Black and brown parents and students have called out for greater resources, both related to the infrastructure of the school, related to the curriculum and having more culturally relevant curriculum, related to having smaller class sizes and having greater resources. The state at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level shrug and say, hey, we're doing all we can. And they couldn't find those millions and those billions then. But after a school shooting, we can find millions and billions to add police officers to schools, right? So there is this pathology that it's needed for Black and brown students, and this disregard for its detrimental impact on the lives of them and their families. Taking us into current day, where school districts and states and localities have invested millions and millions into school policing. You have 1.6 million students attending a school with a police officer, but no counselor. So I'm going to go back to the hypo every now and then. No counselor. So how are we saying that we need an officer in the space to stop something if it happens when we're not, in the same breath we're saying that we're not willing to invest in the preventative measures and those other professionals who are available to make sure these situations don't happen in the first place, and to make sure that if they do happen, they have the relationship with the student and the training to de-escalate without the authority to kill. At the end of the day, if you walk in as a law enforcement officer or you're in any space, you actually have the authority to kill in certain instances if you feel threatened. And research shows that officers see Black youth, Black males in particular, as older and more threatening than their white counterparts. They see young Black girls as older and more culpable and less in need of support. There's also this, there's multitude of evidence to show, and seeing people in the streets today demonstrating that the policing of Black and brown bodies is tied to American history as a whole, and it is something that has a detrimental impact on our communities, and in particular in our schools. But so people really lose sight rather of what we could do when we say police-free schools. Police-free schools is a discussion of what should be. It's not simply remove police from schools. It's remove them from schools and actually provide the resources and make the proper investments so that we can create positive school climates where these things are less likely to happen. And we already know the education of Black and brown students has never really been a true priority in this country and in many localities. So that's what we're really asking for. So you look here, I mean, none of this should be surprising. The Black girl number is really powerful, and I think as was mentioned earlier, I'm really happy to know that it's not just my brother's keeper anymore, but my brothers and sisters keeper, because for so long we worried about young Black men or young Black boys. And the truth is, the harm of school policing and the harm of a lot of oppressive factors at the school level are actually against Black girls, who are 4 times more likely to be arrested, 3 times more likely to be referred to law enforcement, and 2 times more likely to be physically restrained in school, and not receive the same level of regress and attention and investment that we put into helping Black boys. So at this point, it really is an effort to support all of us. And at this juncture, let me see what's next. Okay, I'll take questions after this one. So we started the campaign for police-free schools around 2017, the national campaign, and it was really sparked heavily by the incidents at Spring Valley High School in Columbia, South Carolina, where a young woman who was in foster care was slammed out of her desk for not giving up her cell phone. All she did was say, okay, I don't want to leave the classroom, but I'm not gonna give you my cell phone either. She's in foster care, she'd been going through a lot. And Officer Slam comes in and slams her to the ground, drags her out. And then they arrest the young woman who videotaped. His literal name was Officer Slam, not literal name, but the name they gave him was Officer Slam. And the reason the cameras were out, because they knew he was going to do this, right? Multiple complaints, but nothing happened. So we really want to highlight with this slide just the multiple instances we're at of roughly 150 instances of school assaults that have been documented against students of color by school police. And these are just the ones from North Carolina that I have on the side, and we know that there have been more since. And once again, it's not exclusive to Black boys. It is Black women are also heavily abused by school police officers. So at this point, I'll stop and just ask folks want to open up a brief conversation. There is more to this piece, but don't want to just be rambling the whole time.
So I have a question just about the number that was 1.6 million kids are in a school with a cop except not a counselor. Is that within the entire United States, or like what area is that for?
That is in the entire United States. If you look at more rural, more impoverished districts, the number is worse than that, where you only have a few counselors for an entire district who have to go around from school to school to school, but each of those schools will have multiple police officers in it. So that is a national number based on the data from the Civil Rights Data Collection.
Right, and so I know I go to Enloe, and Enloe we have like about 2,500 kids, and so we're a pretty big school, but we only have 4 or 5 counselors, I think. And so it's really hard to, I guess, schedule time with your counselors and like actually get to know them between classes. How should, do you think the school should hire more counselors to also be around for school incidents and whatever? Because I know a lot of counselors don't leave their offices at all within the day.
Right. And we're actually going to talk about for Wake County, a proposal called the Peace Builders. So having community members who are trained in restorative justice and de-escalation, and these are paid, it's a paid position to be at schools to help build relationships with students, identify conflicts before they happen, help build students' social and emotional skills and adult social and emotional skills. We all need that education on a regular basis, not just for students. And to help establish, restorative justice it is not a reactive practice. It is preventative in nature. It's proactive to create an environment that's safe. And so these peace builders would be there to help implement restorative justice in the schools and also be trained in de-escalation when these things happen.
Todd, I think one of the questions we have to ask is why has policing increased here in the last couple of years? I don't know the average age of people on here. I remember when I was in high school, the only time we had cops were at athletic events. We didn't have them during schools. So why have 2 or 3 SOR officers at each high school, whether they're in Raleigh or here in Raleigh, whether they're Raleigh or Wake County? Why has that number increased? Is that because of suspension rates, the way that the teams are operating there? I don't know. So I can make some assumptions, but why has that increased? Because back in the days, cops were only in my high school. When I went to Broughton High School, I'm from Raleigh. The only time you had cops at schools at a basketball game and a football game, and it won't be like 2 of them.
Yeah, in the major cities, you see that rise start to happen earlier than in places like North Carolina, South Carolina, and in the South. And so here it really is tied to partly to this expansion and war on drugs and the actual buildup of the youth justice system. Because if you build these jails, you build these youth detention facilities, you got to put somebody in them. If you have this large drug task force, you're going to also say, well, how is the school related? How are we going to get in there to have this task force active in the school? If you have a gang task force, which also started to come up in the 80s and the 90s, around the same time you see the boom with the youth justice system, then you need people to actually be in those task forces, to be employed, and to identify youth who then are going to be criminalized later. One thing we skipped over, there's a really long history presentation I have, but I didn't want to kind of bore folks with that this time, is that you have the super predator narrative that Hillary mentioned, that Hillary was a part of. Bill Clinton was also a part of that piece. Donald Trump was a part of that piece. It's also which is tied to the Central Park 5, where and this is kind of 80s into early 90s, where they're saying, okay, look at all these children exposed to crack, their parents on crack, or maybe they're using drugs themselves. They're beyond repair. We need to lock these children up, right? Lock the children up, hopefully rehabilitate them, but if not, then just carry them on into the adult justice system. So you really start to see this influx in the late 80s and in the early 90s of police everywhere with the DARE programs as well. It's kind of an extension of this arm reaching into the schools. And at the same time, so at that time in the early 80s, the youth justice system isn't predominantly Black, isn't predominantly brown. And the most people in the youth justice system actually are in there for status offenses, like drinking, cigarettes, driving without a license. And with this anti-gang push and this increased war on drugs that we see in the late 80s and into the 90s, the entire youth justice system flipped to where it became predominantly Black and brown. Right? So there is a specific time period where those people where officers come in and play a larger role in the school building, even in rural areas like Wake County.
And I think we have to understand that Bill Clinton was the one that came up with the 3-strike rule, right? Let's not understand, let's go back to Ronald Reagan years. That's why the reason why Ronald Reagan and George Bush were presidents was the war on drugs. That is why they became president. They pushed that agenda to do that. That's why they became president of the United States. And then Bill Clinton, some Black folks always said he was our first Black president. If I'm not mistaken, Bill Clinton is white. Obama's our first Black president, so let's not get that twisted. But Bill Clinton want to apologize when they came up with the 3-strike rule. Once he's in office, he want to apologize in '94. The 3-strike rule is already in place, and that is why Hillary didn't become president, because folks ain't forgot about that either. That's what I'm thinking about Hillary. But
and I thank you for that comment. So we really want to continuously tie school policing into the current state of criminalization in America, the current state of policing in America. The same police that are killing unarmed Black and brown people in the streets are the same police that are abusing, assaulting, tasing, pepper spraying, arresting Black and brown youth in our schools. These police are no different. And this wave of criminal, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I didn't want to interrupt you. I do have a question, though.
Yes.
How do you all feel that this new Democratic presidential ticket is going to affect a lot of this stuff that we're talking about with policing in schools, right? Because we talk about Bill Clinton, but Joe Biden also was the person who wrote those policies, right? And Kamala Harris made her career locking us up in California. And she called herself a prosecutor. She was going to be the prosecutor president.
Right.
So we've been out here marching for over 100 days, protesting, talking about defund the police, talking about needing law enforcement reform. My question is, what do you all think, honestly, is going to happen with this ticket if they were elected?
There's a federal bill right now that President Warren put forward that calls for the removal of school police, and you can get funding to implement restorative justice practices called counseling, not criminalization. At the federal level, what we need them to do are to stop allowing federal funds to be used for school police, and B, create grant streaming funding streams, that promote restorative practices and other alternatives to policing. Because of what you just said, Biden's history and Kamala's history, we just need them to stay out the way and don't do anything. Because in my opinion, if they do something, it's not going to be good. Because neither one of them have a track record for supporting movements for police accountability, or for supporting movements for defunding, downsizing policing, and funding alternatives to policing. So unless they, wake up tomorrow and start listening to people on the streets, which neither one of them I think have done, then I think it's a local fight for us, a local and state fight. And luckily, the decision to put police in schools is a local fight. Some states have laws requiring that there's at least one officer in the school, but it's primarily a decision from the school board. So a lot of the fights target the school board, and then for funding for alternatives, you might target the state. But just as far as getting them out and restructuring what discipline looks like in the school, it is more of a local fight. So hopefully they can stay out of the way in that area. And speaking about those local fights, so I also want to make a really big point on this slide that I've heard people say that the current wave of police-free schools campaigns winning throughout the country are kind of reactive, performative activism. It's just reactive policies. And they're just reacting to folks on the streets right now. That is absolutely false. Youth have been organizing to get police out of schools and to instead get investments in alternatives for about 20 years in some places. And so I've been working with them for the better part of my legal career, literally saying police-free schools. Literally, like that report we came to learn was there to help support folks on the ground. And so with this slide, I want to just make the point that in 2018, before George Floyd's murder, before people were out there in the streets, right? All of these places, including Wake County, had organizations who were calling for police-free schools. I worked personally with Phoenix, Denver, Oakland, San Francisco, Philadelphia, and Madison. And so all those places have been calling for it. The George Floyd incident, the murder of George Floyd, it created an opening for existing campaigns that were driven toward reducing the carceral state, reducing or eliminating policing, and instead funding alternatives. And so just wanted to point that out. So now you have, after the murder of George Floyd and the current uprising still hasn't gone away yet, and hopefully will not, all of these places now have police-free schools. So this really is meant to speak to those people who think that what's going on now is reactionary and it's just like people will go away and we'll go back to normal. Like, no, these were campaigns that fought hard to win. And also this demonstrates that that removing police from schools and implementing alternatives is achievable. It's not even radical anymore. It's not a radical idea. It used to be, sadly, but it is a real idea that people are doing. And it's not just remove police, it is remove police from schools and add something. So Oakland is adding something similar to a peace builder model where they're gonna have folks in there who can implement restorative practices and also be there to de-escalate. And then in other areas, you have police just removed from the general space altogether with an increased funding in alternatives in mental health support, in nurses, and counselors, et cetera.
Mr. Tyler?
Yes.
If I could quickly just ask a question. So is the problem with, I guess, so you mentioned Kamala Harris's history and Joe Biden's history.
Mm-hmm.
Is the problem with like just with police and schools, or is there something that, like, I guess the other legal side of things in terms of lawyers and prosecutors like do that also like hurts or fuels the system? And is it bad to be a prosecutor in terms of like in this situation specifically?
The reason we call it the carceral state or even the prison industrial complex is because one piece of it doesn't account for the whole thing. So policing is not the only area we want to look at. There are disparities for Black and brown students, and in particular Black girls, at every step of the way, at policing, at filing of the charge in juvenile and adult court, of prosecuting a youth as an adult, at the disparities in sentencing, the length of sentencing. There's a disparity in who's put on probation and who's not, and there's disparities in violating probation. All of these things collectively come together to criminalize youth of color throughout the United States and adults as well, but my particular focus is youth, right? So we have spoken with prosecutors, and I believe the prosecutor in Durham said they weren't going to take cases of youth in schools anymore, at least not all of them, right? They were going to be very choosy about that. So I think working with prosecutors to go ahead and get them on board to say that I don't want my courtroom filled with this type of behavior. You should handle that somewhere else and not bring them into the courtroom. Looking at the judges also, having the judges know that removing a child from the home and putting them in a detention facility is going to cause more trauma than it is be supportive or teach them a lesson, quote unquote, is also powerful. I've seen judges come to us, a former job when I was at the Burns Institute, and say, the school district is sending me all these youth. I need y'all to come in and figure out, like, I don't want these youth in my courtroom, all right? I've even, believe it or not, it was, where was this in California? It wasn't San Jose. I think it might have been Vallejo, where the police officers came to the school district to say, stop calling us. Like, what, like, so, and so, which goes to your point too, it's not just the actors in the justice system, it's also the teachers calling police officers on students for everyday behavior, especially students of color. They found that it was over 33,000 calls in Oakland to the Oakland PD by teachers. And so then what that led to was a pledge, a teacher's pledge, which we also want to bring here in Wake County and in Durham, a pledge that where teachers sign on to say, I'm not calling police on students for all of these reasons. Instead, I'm going to demand that the school has what it needs to support these students. And I'm going to work to create a classroom environment where these things don't happen. Thank you for that question.
I have a question before we move forward.
Sure.
Sorry to cut you off.
No,
I was wondering, is there any research on, I would say, like the racial and ethnic background of the teachers and their likelihood to call the police on the students?
There's this, not on calling police specifically. There is research to show that teachers in particular suspend, expel, and are basically use exclusionary discipline at greater rates on students of color. This is being white teachers, especially the peak of this disparity is when you have less than 20% Black and brown in a school and around 80% white. So things get worse when you have that under 20% Black population. They're targeted more. I know that sounds almost counterintuitive. They're targeted more when that population goes below 20. So yeah, there is a lot of research on that specific issue. We do want to teach teacher diverse. We want diverse teachers. We want diverse curriculum, and we do think that having some idea of the culture, the background of students is helpful. I represented a student in New Orleans. There was a TFA teacher from like Rhode Island or something like that. The student said "finda." She asked him to do something. He said, "I'm finda." She said, she asked him again. He said, "I'm finda." She tried to write him up, suspend him for cussing her out. She didn't know what finda meant. And so at this point, they recommended him for expulsion because he'd already been suspended before, right? But so I don't even want to get into privatization. The privatization of schools is also adds to the injury of criminalization within schools, right? And so bringing teachers in through TFA, I'm not going at the organization, but we clearly want to employ and adequately employ teachers from the areas where students come from, as opposed to ship in a 21, 22-year-old who has no idea of this particular culture. And in doing so, and at the same time, put them in a school that needs a more qualified professional. So, right, the schools that end up getting TFA are quote unquote the Title I schools or whatever, when that's where individual from that community who's already there and highly trained would be a much better person to be there, as opposed to someone who's cheaper even. TFA ends up being cheaper because they are supplemented through TFA. They're cheaper for the charter school or cheaper for the district. So privatization also plays a key role. And the report digs into that as well. The link between privatization, criminalization, school closures, and then a turnover of a school into a charter school or some other type of school. One book is Death by a Thousand Cuts, goes into school privatization, but it really has a great layer of how criminalization is played into that. And then on our end, we're looking at criminalization with We Came to Learn, but also discuss that slice of privatization. All right. So there are a myriad of strategies that groups have worked on to attain police-free schools and attain the type of school environment that the youth in that school really envision for themselves. These strategies come from really this list right here of all the work these advocates, these youth have been doing. And so I just want to break this down for a little bit. So there's a clearly divest, invest, which also mirrors the demands that we hear in the streets with regards to policing. Because when folks say defund police, that's not the end of the sentence, right? It's defund police and then fund alternatives and resources for communities that don't criminalize them. So we say divest, invest, we mean divesting from school policing and investing in restorative practices and in health professionals, even in your teachers. Well, we do believe teachers should be paid, for their work, and also having enough teachers so you can have smaller classroom environments where students can get more individualized attention. That in itself leads to less disruption, automatically. Even investing in universal pre-K. We know for a fact universal pre-K leads to better outcomes for every single student who goes through it. Yet we don't do it. That's research has confirmed that. But we'll build a new jail though. We'll build a new prison, right? But we won't give you universal pre-K. That's we talk about. Let's see, maybe Kamala and Biden can help us out with universal pre-K. Maybe they can do that. Yeah, I know. Decriminalize. So the law that the student in South Carolina was arrested for was disrupting school. That's it. There's a law for disrupting school. This law is made for SROs. If they can't find no other law, it's the same thing as disorderly conduct in the street, which we know is subjective and disproportionately used to target Black and brown people. In the school context, it's disturbing school. It's terroristic threats, even assault, right? These things are used to criminalize age-appropriate adolescent behavior. I'm not saying desirable adolescent behavior. I'm saying age-appropriate adolescent behavior. We already know youth take risks. You know they're going through things emotionally. They're still figuring out what their identities are. There's a myriad of reasons why youth could blow up and not blow up, but get angry and act out. Our role as adults in that space is to meet them where they're at and meet that energy, which may come off as negative, with positive responses and a nurturing response, not with criminalization or even physical restraint. So decriminalize, so removing those laws that allow for youth to be criminalized in school. We ultimately are going to push for youth decriminalization as a whole. We don't believe that youth should be criminalized, period. And we don't believe in youth justice facilities. Even at this point now, most of them are around 25, 30% capacity. The building's still running and they're still fully staffed. We need that money for something else. To deprioritize the use of police in schools. Make sure that they are an instrument of last resort. If there is a reason that you need to call police to the school, then call them. They already have jurisdiction in the school. You don't need to have an officer there. You don't need to have these contracts with police and these agreements that cement them in schools in order for them to respond to a situation. Clearly having them there didn't stop any of the previous school shootings. But what could have and what has are having positive relationships with students. Demilitarize and disarm. Tasers, batons, pepper spray, the actual gun, all these things. There's been multiple instances of of the officer accidentally discharging, instances of, this still happens regularly with the pepper spray when there's a fight. I don't get how that's okay. Students have asthma. Like this, you are endangering everyone in the room when you do that. Anyway, get off my soapbox for that. But this demilitarize and disarm, which also includes metal detectors and school surveillance. Right now, they're using facial recognition technology. They're monitoring social media, which all costs money. And not only does it cost money, it is ineffective. I've even heard law enforcement say, yeah, social media monitoring is ineffective, but we want the information anyway. And they know it's ineffective because you can't just search for certain words outside of context and it actually lead to something. and to delegitimize the idea that police in schools make students safe, and to push forward the narrative that it creates a toxic environment. That's really a narrative-based campaign, and it goes back to sharing the history and other things. And ultimately, we want to end the relationship between law enforcement and schools. And by law enforcement, we mean also include ICE, Homeland Security, and we want to create a really inclusive environment for Black and Brown students, Indigenous students, LGBTQ, non-binary. We want students to be free to be themselves. And this part is really about the student decision-making authority and allowing their vision to be reflected in the budgets and the policies that we see in schools every day. So we got an hour in. How many do I have left? Where are we? Okay, well, next I was gonna go into the data for Wake County. Does anyone wanna, well, let's do that before, yeah, let's do that and then we'll kind of end off with a discussion. Unless there's a question right now. Did somebody, what? Nope, all right. Wake County, 73% of students referred to the juvenile court. 73 are Black and Brown, when Black students are 22% of the population. There is no research. In fact, the research shows that Black and Brown and white students, basically students don't act out based on race. Black students don't act worse than white. Latinx students don't act worse than, there's no evidence to show that students are more disrupted by race, yet we see these statistics. And these statistics mirror the imprisonment ratios that we see on the street. So this is the same issues of policing in the community are the same issues of policing in the street. And for Durham, it is the same thing. And so this goes to your question, was it Khalid? So Wake County has more schools where the schools where the Black population kind of, well, you don't have these, you have more schools where there's a heavier white population and a lower Black population. That actually leads to more criminalization and targeting for those students. Whereas in Durham, there's just, even though this disparity is horrible, there are more kind of predominantly Black schools there. We're still we're still over policing and arresting in a discriminant way ourselves. Is another thing that pops out to me with these statistics. Because when you look at who the SROs are, who the chief is, a lot of these folks are Black too. So we're not talking about we need more Black police officers. That's some 1960s and 70s type reform, right? We passed that now. It didn't work. It didn't work. The Black officers shoot you just as fast as the white, and they will arrest you just as fast. So and for similarly kind of erroneous reasons. So these are statistics in Wake. Across the state, 47% of youth referred to the justice system are Black, and only 25% of the statewide population. This number down here is real big though. 45% of all delinquency complaints in North Carolina are school related. School police are the engine of youth criminalization, of the school to prison pipeline. School police fill the beds of youth detention facilities. If we invested more in the counselor in the first hypo than we did in the officer in the first hypo, we could bring down the total number of youth we criminalize in North Carolina, and instead give them a supportive environment. And the ratio of incarceration in North Carolina is 10-1 for Black to white youth. For every 1 white youth sent to youth detention, there's 10 Black. And 47% are of the school-related piece are Black, and then 45% of all come from school. School policing in North Carolina funnels Black students into the justice system, period. There's no other picture I can paint. And the only other excuse folks can give is, well, parenting, it's the parents' fault, or Black kids need to do better. There is elements of self-hate in those arguments. If you believe that simply because someone is Black or simply because someone comes from a certain environment, and that they need to get themselves together, and that criminalization and locking children in the cage is okay. It's not a radical idea to say that we should not lock children in cages, and that we should not invest in counselors, in support staff, in health professionals instead of more police. That shouldn't be a radical idea. And these numbers demonstrate. So I think at this point, well, I'm just gonna finish and then we can just talk, I guess, and go back. Does that make sense? Thumbs up? Down? All right. This is a statement from the Wake County Black Student Coalition. I believe Lydia is also a member of that as well. Yeah, big ups. They've been doing a lot of work and got really activated after the George Floyd's murder. Excuse me. And so these are just some of the statements that they're really mirroring the things we've talked about the entire time. The one at the bottom is real powerful for me. The idea that if you even want to go out off campus to go eat, the fact that you've been harassed before means you're just going to act differently. I've been targeted once, even if you know you're not doing nothing. The idea that someone has to think, do I even want to go through that today? No, I don't. I'm just going to stay here. What type of freedom or what mindset are we giving our youth right now when we put them in that predicament where they have to be searched on a regular basis just to live? We're letting them know that contact with police officers is necessary. Or for them, that it's going to be necessary for the rest of their life, right? But we know that that's false. And yeah, this is good. So the Peace Builders, Wake County Black Student Coalition, Education Justice Alliance are putting forth a platform. Part of the Wake County Black Student Coalition platform, one piece is police-free schools. But for Education Justice Alliance, this Peace Builder program is a large piece. And basically, you hire people who view students from a different perspective, are trained to be more listeners, to be more compassionate, as opposed to enforce the law, who the only tools they have are really their relationships with students, and the same thing that we all have, not guns or weapons, who look like the same people in the students' communities, and whose idea of success are the positive relationships that they have with students and actually preventing conflicts from even happening. So let's flip our concept of safety on its head and put some people in there who are down to promote that. And so the next lunch and learn will be Education Justice Alliance, and they will be talking in depth about this Peace Builder program. And I think, yes, with that, I'll need to stop talking. I'm sorry, there's a lot of talking. But yeah, any questions or whatever?
Yeah, so I have a question for the or this, I guess, is more of a comment for the Peace Builder program. I think it's really great, and it just immediately reminds me of like the language arts teachers. There's a running joke, like the language arts teachers, like you eat lunch in their room and they're always like the teachers that you go to talk to about things, but in reality, like I guess that shouldn't really be their job, or it shouldn't be like a label that we put on them. There should be other people, that are actually paid to do that, because a lot of times it's teachers just like using their extra time that they don't get paid for to like open their classroom doors and to interact with students.
And that's been an issue with a lot of implementation of restorative justice, over the last 10 years, is that they will hire one restorative justice coordinator for the whole district, and then the restorative justice coordinator works with teachers to do circles outside of their working hours. But they already had a job. They have a job. Mm-hmm. Let them do that job, and let's hire other people to help run these circles. As a former teacher myself, at the end of the day, I was done. I was really exhausted. And then you still got to go home and grade papers and call parents and do things like that. And so to think that there's just another actual profession added on to my current profession, it's just too much. And so we actually need to invest in professionals who can simply just do that one thing.
This is my question, I guess, for like, if you I personally like really want to get involved with this, but everybody, we're going back to school and we're going to be extremely busy, within the next couple of weeks. How do you, I guess, make this sort of like a daily effort, or how do you really ingrain this so that you can still keep working while you're also a student?
Yeah, so I would encourage folks to join the organization you're a part of, Wake County Black Student Coalition. I'm organized is always going to be my answer to things like that. Find a local political body who you can organize with, who you can grow with. These are the folks that help these movements go. The victories we talked about earlier were formed through organizing, through youth, getting on the ground, and working with some adults as well. To sharpen their political analysis, to actually create proposals for change, and then demand those proposals from the people who are paid to serve them, but see them more often as a nuisance, right? I think, yeah. So joining the organization you're in, Education Justice Alliance as well. For Durham County, we have the Youth Steering Committee, and you can contact me for more information about that. We're looking for youth between, 13, really, so 9th to 11th grade. If there's a senior, that's fine, to participate in our campaign for ending the school to prison pipeline in Durham. We'll meet twice a week, and there is one retreat in the beginning here in early September. So yeah, find a political home and stay active. Even outside of work, I try to do that myself. Recently joined Durham Beyond Policing, so I'll be having to do even more research on the weekends. But I think that level of commitment is necessary if we're gonna all struggle and win together.
How do you convince, so right now I'm in the house because of COVID, and it's been difficult, I guess, convincing my parents about social media presence, and the, I guess, dangers of activism, and putting yourself out there and stuff. What's your advice on going about that?
No, you're gonna try to get me in trouble. But so the activists, I mentioned the Chicano walkouts, the student marches in Philadelphia and Baltimore. Their parents didn't want. Even the march, was the March on Selma. Like the civil rights movement was led by youth, and there were always parents who were scared for their participation, and rightfully so. Every parent has an innate fear that their child is going to fall victim to this stuff and be targeted later. My parents were the same way with my activism. So all I can do is justify their fear, and I can't. I will. Maybe is there a parent on the call who can take this one? I don't have children either, so, and I don't want your parents to be mad at me. Yeah, could someone else field this one? No? All right, well, sorry, Lydia, you're on your own.
That was a tough question.
I have a question. Are you all doing something to that effect? You were saying that you're a part of an organization that's working to end school policing in Durham. Are you all doing some of that in Wake County too? And how can we do that?
Yes, so the Education Justice Alliance, the Wake County Black Student Coalition, Southern Coalition for Social Justice, and ACLU North Carolina as well. And even Legal Aid has also joined this coalition. We're all coming together on a regular basis to help. We created a proposal that we'll be releasing soon. We're going to have some workshops to help educate community about this issue, and we will be engaging with the school board because their elections come up in November. All of them are up for election. We want to use that as an opportunity to really make sure that our voices are heard. So I would reach out to Education Justice Alliance. If you are a parent or just kind of an adult advocate, if you are a youth advocate, to reach out to Wake County Black Student Coalition. And my email, so feel free to email me. I can put you in contact with all those folks. You also email Lydia too for the student side.
Yeah, I'll put mine in the chat.
Okay, great. But so yeah, and definitely encourage people to get active. It's been tough trying to engage and organize with COVID, because doing a lot of this stuff on Zoom, people get Zoom fatigue and all that, but it's something that we got to do. So
Lydia, I want to say Thank you for carrying the torch and being a young person out here, continuing to do the work. I like Tyler, grew up being an activist also in school and things like that. So it's beautiful to see that this is continuing on, that, you know, young people are carrying on and making sure that they're making strides for everyone. So thank you for all the hard work that you're doing. And please let us know if there's anything that we can do to support you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just a member. I'm still learning from upperclassmen, learning from the big folks in school. But thank you for that. I also I run a YouTube channel, so I'm just making informational videos on activism. And I can put that in the chat as well. But that's sort of what I'm working on right now.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
There's some space on our blog spots for some of her videos from YouTube, so we can help get her message out there on our website.
I do have a question. So have you, this is for Tyler, have you looked into research regarding, I know we're talking about universal preschool, but also the disciplinary process in preschools and how they're kind of disproportionate among people of color too? Have you looked into that?
I have earlier in my career, I did, yes. And we've seen that the use of exclusionary discipline is disproportionate from the moment students of color go to school. And, you know, what can be seen as a temper tantrum for one student is seen as, you know, violent for another, especially when you look at suspensions and expulsions for hitting. I was personally, I'll just go ahead and say, I was expelled from kindergarten for hitting. I was. And then, for hitting. And not, anyway, it was ridiculous. But I definitely think that if I was a white youth, a white child, it would not have been the same case. So, yeah, the research, like the data at this point too, we have data that shows across the board that these things are happening and they're ubiquitous. And so, at what point are we going to listen to, or, you know, take the data seriously and listen to student voice and parent voice? Because at this point, the research has been done. It's been added up, you know. There's only so much more a doctoral student can look up, you know.
Can we get the presentation that you had?
Yes, I'll send it to Minnie. Okay. So Minnie can send it out with my contact info too.
Okay.
And this presentation is also recorded, so you can also go back and look at it.
Oh, cool, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
But I just want to add a quick comment. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to add a quick comment. You're talking about with being like suspended for hitting. I think like I know especially at my school, like we I would say like most of the kids, like we don't have a lot of fights very often, except you'll see people get suspended for other things like tardiness, you know, like the pass system and lunch and everything. Like it, you don't see a lot of physical violence, I guess, within my school specifically, but people will get suspended for minor offenses. You know, when we have other, I guess, more important minor offenses going on, like cyberbullying, you know, and other things that are actual problems. But if you don't have a blue pass, you know, like a couple of times, then you're out of school, you know.
That's right. And that's just the first step. You're talking about all these things are pieces of that school to prison pipeline that touch people at different points in their life. And it's sad that the school building has become that.
Well, it seems like the system is working properly and in order as it should. As sad as that sounds, I was having this conversation with somebody earlier today or yesterday, and I was like, you know, they were like, well, how do we fix this? I was like, but see, that's the thing. It's like, it's working properly. Us trying to fix it are the glitches. Like those are the parts that need to be fixed. Us trying to fix it, unfortunately. But I think that it is going to take a collective effort. Like you said, just as much as the system is set up to be intentional, we have to be equally intentional about, you know, our survival as others may be about our demise. I think that's why it's important for organizations to not just understand like what you all are doing and understanding school policing and things of that nature, but also understanding how all the dots connect to this, be it housing, be it food insecurities, be it a laundry list of everything. So it definitely is going to take a collective effort for us to move the needle on this.
I think
So I have one thing. I have one thing to add. I'm sorry. The initial hypo, a lot came out for a bad scenario for the police officer, right? All the data and everything we talked about demonstrate that bad scenario is just the normal scenario. I missed that teaching point, and I just wanted to say that again. I'm sorry to throw you off.
So I think I was thinking about this like a long time ago, maybe a couple months ago, about how in North Carolina, the number of white teachers in the classroom, and especially like the number of suspension rates, like you showed us how it's like 45% are like school delinquency, and how I think in North Carolina, 70% of the teachers are white and women. And looking at also how what is it called? I forgot what it's called. It's like the teacher program in North Carolina where they put into what is it called? It's like a fellowship program for NC teachers, but all the universities are predominantly white, and there's no HBCUs at all. So they're not filtering in those Black teachers. And additionally, I know that either it's Gulliford or what county it was, but I was telling Tulupe and Khalid a while ago that they actually got, I think, Caribbean teachers into the rural and like heavily like Black affluent neighborhoods and school systems. So I'm just thinking it's interesting, like how could one of the aspects be like increasing diversity in teachers and being more intentional in that realm?
I definitely think that's important. Representation is important generally. But I also think it needs to be local. I think pulling from the specific communities of where the students come from and building up those areas is really the most important when it comes to teacher diversity, because they're actually going to understand where the students coming from literally. They're going to be a part of that community and be more invested in the life of that student as opposed to kind of being this outsider from another space. And it's important to educate folks about the harms of the justice system. Because there's a lot of people who think, oh, we'll call the police or send them this way because they need to know better and they need to learn, without recognizing all the collateral consequences that come with the contact with the justice system. So we need to work on ourselves too. So like, we need to educate other Black folks, other brown folks about the ills of the carceral state, and start helping people think creatively. So that once we put them in those positions, they don't actually mirror the same type of discipline policies that were done by the white teachers. We actually need to change our concept of discipline and criminalization as a whole, right? The representation is a piece of it, but I think there's actually a pathology that needs to shift.
Yeah, and for magnet schools, I guess then that's my question, because a lot of us, like I know people live as far as Apex to Roseville, in terms like how would you suggest like getting, I guess, teachers from the local area when you have like a, I guess, divide between kids and students that live around the school and students that bus in?
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so for magnet schools, like you have kids from Apex to Roseville, coming into this one area, and there's honestly a big divide between the students that live around the school and the students that bus in as part of that program. And so how do you get, I guess, teachers that represent or are able to deal with and teach both populations?
Yeah, that's a tough one all the way around. I do think that kind of goes to the college question from before. You got it.
I don't want to interrupt, but I do want to jump in because I actually went to and graduated from Enloe some time ago, a long time ago. But I called up to Enloe some years ago. We had a program in Evolve, which is the organization that leads the MBK initiative. And we were assigning students to be interns down at the General Assembly for different senators and things of that nature. And I called Enloe and I spoke to one of the counselors, and I wish I would have gotten her name. And I said, hey, we have a program for, we want to get some kids from Enloe. We want to use, to be interns down at the General Assembly for these senators. And the counselor was so excited. It's like, yeah, that's great. We have plenty of students. I said, yeah, well, we want somebody from Southeast Raleigh. And her tone changed. And then it was, oh, I got to get back to you. And so to me, the counselors are a major, that kind of goes to answering your question somewhat. Like, counselors are a major part of that. The teachers can't do everything, but there should be things going on in school that build school pride and spirit. I mean, we used to do some of that back in the day in some measure, but some of this is just kind of what it is. That divide was there when I went to Enloe. I think it's a divide that just is, because we have to consider that, in my opinion, classism is the granddaddy of racism. So that's a part of what's at play here. And it could be Black students that's from Southeast Raleigh and a Black student that's from Roseville, you know what I'm saying? Or Holly Springs or somewhere like that. And then there's going to be a rift or a divide because of that class space. I think that there maybe has to be more that, unfortunately, I would hate to say that it kind of has to be student led, because, as I said, we all have a part to play in it. These counselors really, I think they should be instrumental in helping the students make sure that this is happening, but they can't really relate in some measure to what's going on at the school, you know what I'm saying? And some of this has to be kind of like a led piece from you all. So I hate to hear that that's still happening. I'm not surprised, you know what I'm saying? Like I said, classism is a thing, but maybe coming up with different, ways that they can do some sort of school. Do y'all still do school spirit week and things like that?
Yeah, we still have Spirit Week, pep rally. I'm on the student equity team, and so we're honestly just trying to come up with new ideas for the school year, and how to bring people closer together. But I guess just because it's such a big school, we all have such different schedules, we all come from different places, you can really feel the divide in students, and their backgrounds. And the teachers, we have a diverse set of teachers, but they all, I guess, would say they don't really relate as much to the kids that come from Southeast Raleigh or come from populations around the school. And so there's a cultural divide as well, with references, conversation, and just simple things that I've noticed, being that I live out here, I live in Roseville, and my parents are both highly educated. And so there's certain things that I understand that I know that my other peers, my friends, wouldn't really get, and teachers don't mean to be divisive, but there is that divide within education and within the school.
I think tracking.
I moved here from Chicago to to Enloe on the south and moved to Southeast Raleigh, so I definitely got it different ways around. Yeah, I hate to hear that.
Real quick before you guys move on, there was a question in the chat box. Lauren wanted to know, what is the best curriculum for Black youth, and what could that look like, and what could be seen as valuable teachings for Black youth?
So I put wecametolearn.com in the chat. So there's a report, We Came to Learn, and then there's the actual action kit, which helps students and advocates walk through what school policing looks like in their area. Yeah, but I think we're gonna get creative with our youth. Just looking at Angela Davis, looking at Ella Baker, also who are the leaders and other writers, Polly Murray, if you're in North Carolina, who are the people that you can expose youth to help them, encourage them to be social justice advocates too.
Just if the question is general, this is my opinion, I think that more young Black students need more culturally relevant learning to what Tyler is saying across the board. Teaching them about different inventors and things like that is a great start, but I also think them reading books written by Black authors is important. them seeing true, honest historical context, be it documentaries and things of that nature, not being afraid to expose young Black students to the truth about injustices and oppressions in America early is important. I think that there are ways to even make, math and science and things of that nature culturally relevant, and not just teaching them about, Martin Luther King or things of that nature, but actually, digging into that perspective of it. So that's my 2 cents on like a best curriculum. I think that, as far as a general curriculum for young people, to make sure that we're making sure that we get to the root of it while empowering them at the same time.
I don't know if some of you guys may have grown up watching Roots or Eyes on the Prize or things like that. But those are things that my parents showed me when I was younger, that I realized that a lot of Black kids, a lot of kids, but especially Black kids, like didn't know, or weren't really, they didn't grow up with that. But I think that being that those are such heavy, traumatic pieces of media, like I think that I guess what I'm trying to do with my channel, and what I would like to see a lot more in school, is making things understandable without being traumatic, I guess, and making like going back to making things relevant. I feel like a lot of times there's definitely an age divide between like technology and media and how we perceive things versus how our parents and other adults perceive things. And so if there was more content that's really, I guess, that encompasses conversations, encompasses topics, but then is also palatable on social media, on websites, on stuff that we'd regularly visit, I think that's really important as well. Because like, while I would sit down and watch a 3-hour documentary on it because I'm interested in this topic, I want to learn more about my history, it's not something that everybody wants to do, especially. And if we're trying to educate the masses, people that don't have time for that, then we really need to change the format and how we speak about Black history and social justice topics.
I agree with that. With everything being so short-handed, like 10-second videos and TikToks and all that stuff, it is very relevant, as your point, to have topics or like features that are short and catch your attention and have that impact, especially now knowing that, people's attention spans are pretty much shortened now, especially with everything in social media.
Yeah, but I think that's a hard thing to do, right? Like some of this, we got to get to the meat of it. I think that an ad possibly, so now we're like think tanking it. I think an ad possibly that catches someone's attention, that leads them to something longer. Yes. But I think it's hard for us to say that the the nuances and the levels and all of that, the facets of our culture and our situation in this place and Blackness, not just Black Americanness, it's a hard thing to put into a 60-second bite,
Right. But we could do this for police officers in terms of, because I'm not sure how many police officers really know the stats and know like how mass incarceration, school to prison pipeline like affects their jobs, and what they're doing and how they affect that. And so I think that education, you're talking about education for Black students, but education for police officers and people, school resource officers working there now, would also be important, so that they realize, I guess, the impact of their actions and hopefully act more consciously if we can't get them totally out of schools. Because the budget was just renewed for this school year, I know, at least for Wake County. And so being that it's already done, like within the school year, like there may be some like that may be an avenue to go through.
So we're going to wrap it up with this last question by Irving. They asked any examples of how Black and Brown students have built solidarity. Anybody have any examples?
The County Black Student Coalition, WCBS. They're a great group. I love working with them and learning from them, and they're very, very supportive. And so I'd say that's my example.
And I know in the presentation that Tyler gave, he gave like a nice timeline of student activism. So I think that would be a
Because Oakland, so the Black Organizer Project in Oakland really relied heavily on other efforts from the Latinx community out there, and they really came together. In Phoenix and in Denver, their Police Free Schools campaign was focused on ICE. Really, it was mainly about the impact that the school policing has on undocumented students and their parents, and they saw police in schools as a detriment to Black students because of the statistics, and also a detriment to brown students because people were actually getting deported or detained for their status. So both Phoenix and Denver, it was a Black and brown effort driven by the brown, more so the brown organizing groups, but they definitely saw and stood up for Black folks who were, the statistics were pretty horrible in both of those places. Both those places have a small Black population, but that is clearly disproportionately policed. And so they came together in those campaigns. Same thing going on right now in Philly with Black and brown, and in Miami. Yep.
Well, that was our last question, and we're gonna wrap it up at 12:30, so you guys get a little 30 minutes of free time. Thank you so much, Tyler. We really do appreciate it. It was an excellent discussion. I know I learned so much, as well as other people. If everybody can get like a round of applause virtually, there's like a reaction. Yeah. You know, I doesn't have to do it. I believe that you all did it. So yeah, I'm gonna pass the torch over to Tulupe, who's gonna give it to Khalid. Actually, I'm gonna pass to Khalid. Khalid's gonna tell you what's up next for MBK.
So I just want to encourage you all again. Thank you for attending our Lunch and Learn today, and thank you again, Tyler. I want to encourage you all to head over to our website, mbkwake.org. Check out our blog section. We have a really cool video from our last event. We did a summer parking party as a drive-in. You can get the preview from that, and it highlights some of the organizations that we worked with over the past year. And feel free to explore our website. We have a partnership submission portal where you can go in, create your profile, and access different data and information for community organizations.
We'll definitely be adding some of your blog posts to our, some of your YouTube videos to our blog posts, Lydia.
Do you have a social media for MBK?
It's Evolve. So we've been trying to create one, but I feel like the man is stopping us. But it is, it's Evolve 919 is our social media for MBK and Evolve. And then we do have a MBK, My Brother's Keeper, Wake County page on Facebook, and an Evolve page on Facebook as well.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you all thank you again, Tyler, for your time. Thank you for everybody for joining in and being a part of this great discussion. Again, this has been recorded. We record all of our lunch and learn, so they are later a resource on our website.